Hey, Alfie, welcome to the show. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. So my name is Alfie. I'm currently the head of US sales at Spendesk. I've just moved to San Francisco, so I managed to get here 1 week before they closed the borders.
How do you like it?
I love it. It's amazing. The weather is from back in Paris in France, and the weather is amazing here in comparison.
Yeah,
Um, but it depends where you come from in California.
yeah. Uh, where are you in the city or are you in the valley?
I'm right in the middle of the city at the moment in a short-term rental and
Yeah.
still trying to find where to move.
So it looks a little bit like Paris in the morning until about 11, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Hey, how'd you get into sales?
So I think I've probably always been into sales to some degree since I was quite young. My first ever job was in a music shop at the end of my road, and I sold musical instruments as a Saturday boy when I was about 13 years old. And at that point, I just absolutely loved it. So most of my jobs have kind of been in some shape or form around that. I've done door-to-door knocking before, lots of other kind of sales in other shops and so on. And then when I went to university, I studied finance, accounting and finance. So I always kind of thought I wanted to go into banking and trading and investment banking. And I ended up going to Bloomberg after I graduated from university and to kind of down that route. And I kind of find myself more gravitating towards the sales role. So I ended up selling trading solutions to banks and hedge funds. So really kind of got into it there. And I was like, okay, there's a real balance over where I was trying to go in terms of what I thought I really wanted to do, and then actually where my sort of skill set was and what I actually really enjoyed doing, which was people and selling. So I went down that route, and then I decided to move over into the startup world, and that's why I'm in Spendesk.
Yeah. Now, what's it like going from a big brand to a startup?
Completely different.
Yeah.
So a big brand like Bloomberg has been around for 20, 30 years, as a monopoly in the market. Everyone knows who you are. Also, the types of sales that we were doing there were very much, they were customers, and it was more upsell and cross sell. And so there was more sales and account management, very slow deals, very different kind of process. And you could leverage that brand name quite a lot. However, when I moved over to Spendesk, there was about 20 people in the company at the time when I joined. We're in Paris. I was looking after the opening of the UK market. No one had ever heard of us. And so you don't have that kind of brand. The sales velocity was a lot higher. So we were doing ACV sizes of anything between 2 and 20 grand a year at the time. We were selling between 2 weeks and 2 months. So it was just very, very different. So the kind of sales cycle itself was different. And then the type of culture as well that you go into, and the expectations of you as a salesperson are not just there to execute, but you've actually got to build and create and iterate, every day and every week of the month to get where you're going. So it was quite a big shift.
Yeah. And how about the difference between working for a French company and a New York company? I worked for a French company once too.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask you, what was your opinion of working for the two?
It was one of my early jobs. The CEO came over to the US. 99% of the business was in the US. It was, I'm trying to remember. It was so long
Yeah,
ago, right? I enjoyed it. Uh,
yeah,
was there much of a difference? Probably not.
yeah.
It was a startup. Everyone wants to grow.
Yeah, so I think so. There's like we're a startup, so we have a lot of similar kind of mindsets of American startups anyway. Just because you're surrounded by those sorts of people, people are very candid. They give very constructive, direct feedback in a short period of time, and I think that's actually something which is incredibly important in a startup, because you need to fix things quickly when they're broken and do that in a way. But in that French culture, it's just part and parcel of that culture. So it's just ingrained in the company, and it works really, really well. What I've noticed actually more from the difference of European companies to American startups in particular is in San Francisco, everyone has a playbook. There's a playbook to do things. You want to build an outbound sales team, there's a playbook. There's a lot of history and knowledge that's been in the city already. And so it tends to mainly be focused around execution of playbooks, and then they iterate and tweak them as they go along. Whereas in Europe, the startup scene is obviously less developed. It's still come a long way, but it's nowhere near like it is in San Francisco. And so a lot of the companies there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of great schools, a lot of great engineers, a lot of great talent there. But most of the time you're seeing a problem for the first time. So you're looking at everything from a blank slate. And that actually creates a really interesting dynamic in European startups, because you tend to attack problems in a very different way. When you're given a playbook, it's hard to see outside of that. And obviously, especially in the sales world, I mean, you know full well yourself, things change so much, and you kind of have to always think like that beginner's mindset. And I think that European culture has got a very good beginner's mindset, and so you can see some pretty good innovation. But then obviously the cost of that is things can take longer because you're figuring it out for longer.
And who are you selling to? Who's the target persona for your product?
Yes, so Spendesk is a spend management platform. So we help companies and employees spend money in the workplace. So effectively, it's a platform which is sold to finance teams, so CFOs, financial accountants, financial controllers, and these sorts of people. But then it's used by everyone within a company that's going to spend money. Yeah.
And how much of your business was inbound versus outbound?
Yeah, so now it's probably about 70%, I'd say, of our revenue is outbound, comes from outbound lead generation. And we're present in 4 markets at the moment: London, Berlin, Paris, and San Francisco, in terms of our cities where we have offices. So whenever we start a new market, we tend to be 100% outbound. It's the easiest way to go from day one to create pipeline and so on. And actually, we've only really recently, we've been around for 3.5 years, and we've only recently built out in the last year our kind of full marketing team and really increased that percentage of inbound leads.
And so when you do an outbound, you go straight to the CFO, or?
Yeah, so what we try and do is aim for the top and then go down. And so what we find is that even if the CFO doesn't necessarily tend to be the economic buyer all the time, it tends to be the financial controllers for us, but they're always going to be in the decision-making process. So we've had a lot of success when we go to the CFOs and they will recommend down to the other people in their team. That always has good success. And it also means that they're in the loop of the sales cycle right from the beginning, even if they're not going to be involved in the crux of getting the ROI and proving that internally. But we do have a big focus on what we call in Spendesk triangulation. So we try not to over-target one buyer persona, and we try and focus on multiple. And I'm sure that many other companies will have a similar dynamic to Spendesk. We add value to many people within the company. So there's a CFO who will get strategic overview of their spend and be able to control things, put processes in place. The financial controller is much more focused on the control, putting processes in the day-to-day. Then you have an accountant who cares about reconciliation and numbers and all the other. And so there's lots of different buyer personas, and we try and really adapt our messaging to prove that value to the different buyer personas at each time.
And is a particular company size or vertical that seems to be most interested?
Yeah, so I think when we first started out, we realized quite quickly that our ideal customer profile was typically between 50 and 500 employees. Someone that would actually have a finance team or at least one person within their finance team. And for example, if they have multiple entities around in different countries, and typically that they're growing fast. So why is that an ICP for us? Well, typically, if you're growing fast, you're going to have and you're a new company, you're going to have the pain for the first time. You probably haven't got anything else in place. You're growing faster, that pain's going to get even worse. And multiple entities in managing spend with like credit cards and around the world is very, very difficult. So these were things that we kind of identified as like a perfect ICP for us. And then again, going into those markets like France, where we've been around for 3.5 years, we go into lots of other different segments because we've kind of saturated that first ICP market, and now we go into other segments and keep iterating with that beginner's mindset as to, okay, where else can we really add value?
Yeah. Because do you ever run into replacing an existing solution?
Yeah, yeah, much more now. Yeah, in the beginning, no, and definitely in San Francisco, for example, yes, because there's more. A lot of the innovation starts here, and also we started 3.5 years ago. So there's a lot of companies here that are in the spend management space. So yes, we do, and more so in Europe. So we're a Series B company, and it's around about now that in the Series B stage that all of the other companies that are saying, okay, what's working? Let's raise some funds and go in that direction. So we've kind of been in the game for a while, and you see a lot more players in the market, which is great. So yes, definitely.
Cool. And what's the hardest part of your job?
Oh, hardest part of the job. Wow, that's that's a big question. There's so many different aspects to my job that I think are quite challenging.
Or maybe the sale, I should say, versus the actual job function.
Okay, I think that when we are effectively a new product category, spend management has never really existed as a category. Every company has had to spend money since the beginning of time,
Oh, right.
but we are coming to a market with something new, which means there's a big focus on education.
Yeah.
You have to educate across what's the status quo to the new. And this is something actually that I think overall in the sales community, it could be a big shift that we're starting to see more happening, but we need to go in this direction, which is a lot of SDRs are focusing on trying to capture a lead that's ready to buy, that knows what they want to buy, and knows that you're the right company to sell, which is
Sure.
which is which is when you
That's
look
fun,
at the
isn't it?
market. Yeah, but there's not many. There's not many that fit the bill. So you face rejection, low email response rates, and so on. And for example, if I said to you, Brian, okay, would you like to improve the way that you get to work? Would you like to be able to get to work in this way? Is there anything wrong with taking the car to work? You'd be like, no, I get to work. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not broken. But then if I change that approach, instead of trying to figure out that you're the right person to tell to, if I said, okay, there's a new way that you can get to work in 30 seconds by clicking your fingers with this new technology. Is that something you'd be interested in learning more about?
Yeah.
That's something that, okay, well, yes, because you're not trying to fix a problem that someone knows that they already have, because in your head you don't have a problem, but there's a new way of doing something, and that's what I think SDRs could really capture more, and they'll have more conversations, because that market that you can then educate becomes much bigger. And then what you'll find is, yes, maybe your conversion rate of those conversations to close deals will go down, but net you'll have a lot more conversations and you'll educate that. And that's something that's super important with a new product category, but I think it's actually extremely relevant with things that have been around for a while in general.
Right. Because you're going after what I call latent pain, meaning
Yeah,
that they have it, but it hasn't reached a name yet.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
As opposed to an active pain like a flat tire, you're
yeah,
quite aware of it. You can't drive your car. Your
it's
tire is
acute.
wearing or
Yeah,
slipping in the rain is kind of latent
exactly.
pain. And this education, how do you do that at scale, though, given that the deal sizes are so small?
Yeah, I don't actually think it's too difficult, to be honest. It's I mean, all the same kind of channels are going to be the same thing. You're still doing cold calls, you're still sending cold emails, and so on. It's just the approach is very different. You're not going there in there saying, hey, would you like to get a new spend management process? Can I have 15 minutes of your time?
Yeah.
No, it's more a case of, hey, I noticed X, Y, Z. Okay, I noticed you just opened up a new office in New York, and you've also got an office in Paris. Your team seems to have grown by X amount of percent in the last couple of years. Are you aware that most companies that use traditional credit cards actually encounter lots of pains and have a month-end close of 8 days? The reason for this is because they weren't designed for business spending, means that the accountants have to auto-categorize and do these things, which actually are manual. Would you like to know a better way of doing that? And that's the difference. You've just got to, it's the same channel, you still send an email, but you're not trying to focus on someone who knows what they need to fix. You're focusing on educating them on a newer way of doing things.
You kind of got to get them from aware to curious.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think, having that awareness as an outbound SDR is, where are these people in the pipe, and you kind of know that the company is going to be qualified. This is the beauty of outbound. You know that a company is relatively qualified because you've segmented them, so that should not be too much of a problem. It's more about the awareness and the acuteness of the pain, and what do they actually have in their system already, and so you have less variables that you really need to play with.
And what makes them that qualification? We got the size. Is it that they're in a growth mode or a particular
So,
industry?
I think that so just to refine your question, what is it that you would like to know?
Well, we talked about company size, big
Yeah,
enough to have a requirement, but not too big to already have a solution.
right.
What are kind of the signals that they're more qualified than others? Are they high tech companies? Are they growing fast?
Yeah, so I definitely think that the more acute that you can figure out the pain's going to be, if they're fast growing. I mean, we do definitely sell into companies that already have solutions in place. The issue is that most of the solutions are focusing on a particular pain point within the life cycle of a payment in the workplace, and so they tend to be plasters on wounds rather than actually solving the real problem. But in terms of what would make a company qualified, is something that's like I mentioned before, if they are a fast growing company, if they have multiple offices, ultimately any company that needs to put a layer of control and reduce the amount of time in terms of admin wise and increase the visibility around spend, is going to be qualified and get value out of using the product.
Yeah. And does the deal typically get stuck at any particular stage? Like right after the proposal, right after the demo?
I think probably the most difficult one is, and I think many companies will probably experience this, is there is no such thing as a decision maker anymore. It's a decision making unit, and so it will. From my own personal experience, is that you're starting to see, even in lower, more SMB and mid-market size deals, there's this enterprise-esque uh, stakeholder environment where you actually need to get multiple stakeholders involved to actually sell a deal. So I think that adds an extra layer of complication for more SMB mid-market companies, because they're not in this mindset of, okay, how do I really manage these multiple stakeholders? And I think that can be something which is difficult, is actually identifying who are the people to make the decision, because most people will focus on one person and they say who's the most senior, but that's no longer the case anymore. It
It
just
never
doesn't happen
was.
like that.
Right? People discover it and they think it was different before, but it's like it never was.
Yeah.
Because if you look at most people's deals, they all go single, what I call going steady with, one person at the account, which is the death
Mm,
nail, because that person doesn't know how to buy, doesn't really know how they buy internally. You're dealing with people who probably do know how to do the administrative side of it, but maybe not the political side of it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true, and I think that we're relatively lucky in that we're not too cross-functional. All the employees will use the products. It's mainly the finance teams that you have to manage there. But it's really, I think the complicated thing there is making sure that you can sell the right story to the right buyer persona, and make sure that when you're speaking to the CFO, you're focused on the value that they care about, because they're rarely in the weeds. They're rarely doing the line by line statement reconciliation. So they don't care about how much you could save time there, because in their eyes they hire someone to do that, and that's that. So you've really got to focus on where they are, and doing that when you're in one presentation with multiple people, that can be more complicated. So I think that's something where I wouldn't say it's like a blocker, but that can stagnate deals in terms of the momentum if you're not careful.
And how do you become a must-have versus just a good idea or nice to have?
Um, I I don't think you can change that. I think that's obviously on the customer side, whether it is a nice to have, but there is an education piece around what is the cost of not acting.
Yeah.
And what's the cost of staying where you are? And again, that is something which is also an element of education. I mean, one of the big things that we can help with is the credit card fraud is massive, particularly in the United States. And the way that companies traditionally manage them is they share credit cards around in their company. So there's credit card numbers all over the internet for business spending, and also employees can share them around. So it's very hard to reduce that. Whereas you may not necessarily think or quantify what is that pain today. Maybe you've never actually had a case of fraud, but you have to, you're never creating that urgency. You're just shining a light on something that they may not have already known before, that would then make them more want to act. And I think showing what the cost is of not acting in the future is one of those. What could happen if something goes wrong? And that's why you should act now. But I think, again, that also comes into the discovery process. When we do a discovery call, we are often focusing on what is the critical event? Why are you acting now? So a question that I really like asking is, why have you come to me today rather than 2 months ago? Because that kind of helps you understand the context in which this has happened. And is this something that they should be able to tell you why this should happen now and not delay it for 4 months' time. And then when you learn these timelines and events and so on, your whole process becomes customer centric, because it's much easier for you to be like, you came for this, you had this date in line, you wanted something in place by here. So each follow-up you do then after is also customer centric. It's not a sales being a pain in the backside. Right. You're sticking to their timelines. And so, yeah, in terms of what have versus is nice to have, you have to uncover that from the customer and figure out where that fits in.
And you as an individual salesperson, what distinguishes you between, you and kind of the rest of the pack, or you and your competitors, or?
Yeah. It's the execution of the process, I think, is extremely important. I think that fundamentally you want to be working for a company that has a great product, and that's kind of like the foundations. But the real thing that makes a difference is the execution and the actual process that you have in place around that. Sales is, I like to think of the process is a science, and maybe the execution is the art. And I think that's the difference. And we've won a lot of business in Spendesk because of the way that we've handled the actual process and really understand the customer and being very customer centric. And the more commoditized you get in an industry, the more things like that really do make a difference. So I think the execution and the process that we have is very good.
And have you started building out your US team yet?
Yes. Yeah. Just started. Yeah.
And what have you found to be the things that you look for in reps?
Curiosity is a key one. Hunger, the ability to encounter and overcome failure. These are some, very key ones. And builders, there's a big difference when you're building out a market for the first time to when you've got, 10 people in your team. Instead of being a plug and play, here's the process, SDRA, you're going to get promoted and you work hard, you hit quota. When you're creating a market, you've got to be all hands on deck, very entrepreneurial. So we want to have signs that people have made stuff happen. They've built something, whether it's their own side project or they've got something that they're very driven to go and execute, go through end to end. Those are the sorts of characteristics that work well. And also competitiveness. We find that, I think, maybe it's become a bit more cliche, but people that are in competitive sports have always worked really well in terms of outbound, because there's just that real drive to actually go and execute to the nth degree. And so that's worked really well for us.
Yeah. Any particular sport over any other?
We've got a mix. We've got black belt judo champions. We've got downhill mountain bikers. We've got marathon type runners. We've got a good mix. So I think the thing in common is someone wants to beat themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That they've used to taking coaching, feedback, habitual training versus just knowing it, not knowing it.
I think that is the resilient side that really helps. It's that competitiveness and that kind of dogged resilience to bear the downtimes and the down troughs, to really enjoy that peaks and push through, because sales is always fluctuating up and down. And when you're in those downs, you just have to have that mindset to keep going and until you get out the other side.
And plus, I would think, even though the sale isn't that expensive, that how you prioritize your time and your judgment of what to work on, given
Yes,
the universe of opportunities,
absolutely,
versus just,
absolutely.
pounding your head against the wall, hoping to break through any minute now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do really believe that deprioritization is just as important as prioritization, and being focused, knowing what you're going to set out for your objectives for the day, which segments you're going after, and where you should spend time. Not all deals are made equal, and we really do find that when you find the right segment, you actually spend less time and make more money on these customers, and you should double down your time. And we've seen massive increases in terms of revenue and productivity just by getting focused and
Yeah.
deprioritizing bad things. And when you're a small team going into a new market, that makes huge differences.
So you're not obsessed with the metrics, KPI driven stuff versus the prioritization, judgment, art of it?
So, we're not spreadsheet managers. These are things that, like KPIs. I think like input KPIs, they help track they help illuminate which levers you need to pull. But we are focused on output, and we're less concerned about how people get to that output.
Yeah.
If we say, okay, you need to create 10 opportunities a month, and someone does that by sending 1,000 emails, fine. Or if someone does 10 cold calls and they make 10 oppos, that person's more efficient, but they've got to the output. And then it's more a case of, we look at those input metrics and KPIs to have a base level to help guide. And then it helps our coaching. So we know, okay, you're going to send a certain amount of emails within a certain reason. This should convert X, Y, Z. If it's not, and it's drastically away from the medium, then we can look at that and say, maybe you need to have a bit more practice on how you construct your cold emails. Is it execution versus the actual strategy that's going on? So we use those kind of KPIs more to illuminate and guide coaching, rather than just point fingers and why have you not hit your numbers? or have your CFO, then they can check out our community called cfoconnect.us. There's lots of fun stuff there, but I'm most available on LinkedIn.